call this meeting to order. So welcome to meeting number 123 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I would like to remind participants in the room of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed to the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. So pursuant to Standing Order 108 Sub 2 and the motion adopted on September 19th, 2024, the committee resumes its study of Russian interference and disinformation campaigns in Canada. I would like now to welcome our witnesses for the first hour. From Meta Platforms, Inc., we have David Agranovich, Director of Threat Disruption by Video Conference, and we have Ms. Rachel Curran, Head of Public Policy Canada in the room. There you go. From TikTok, we have Steve DeEer, Director of Public Policy and Government Affairs Canada, and by video conference, we have Justin Ehrlich, Global Head of Policy Development. And from YouTube, we have Lindsay Doyle, Head of Government Affairs and Public Policy for Canada, and John Hultquist, Chief Analyst, Mandiant Intelligence for Google, and he's appearing by video conference. I thank all the witnesses for being here today and for helping us with our study. I would now invite Mr. Agranovich to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is David Agranovich, and I am the Director of Threat Disruption at Meta. My work is focused on coordinating our cross-company efforts to identify, disrupt, and deter adversarial threats on our platforms. I've worked to counter these threats at Meta for the past 6 years, and previously I worked in the U.S. government on Russian interference issues, culminating as the Director for Intelligence and Director for Russia at the National Security Council. I'm joined today by Rachel Curran, our Head of Public Policy for Canada. And at Meta, we work hard to identify and counter adversarial threats. These include hacking, spyware, and cyber espionage operations, as well as influence operations, what we call coordinated inauthentic behavior, or CIB, which we define as any coordinated effort to manipulate public debate for a strategic goal in which fake accounts are central to the operation. At Meta, our community standards prohibit inauthentic behavior, including by users who seek to misrepresent themselves, use fake accounts, or artificially boost the popularity of content. This policy is intended to protect the security of users in our services and create a space where people can trust the people and the communities that they interact with on our platforms. We also know that threat actors are working to interfere with and manipulate public debate, exploit societal divisions, promote fraud, influence elections, and target authentic social engagement. Stopping these bad actors is one of our highest priorities. This is why we have invested significantly in people and technologies to combat inauthentic behavior. The security teams at Meta have developed policies, automated detection tools, and enforcement frameworks to tackle deceptive actors, both foreign and domestic. These investments in technology have enabled us to stop millions of attempts to create fake accounts every day and to detect and remove millions more, often within minutes after their creation. Just this year, Meta disabled more than 2 billion fake accounts, the vast majority of which, over 99%, were identified proactively before receiving any report from a user. Our strategy to counter these adversarial threats has 3 main components. First, expert-led investigations to uncover the most sophisticated operations. Second, public disclosure and information sharing to enable cross-societal defense. And third, product and engineering efforts to build the insights derived from our investigations into more effective scaled and automated detection and enforcement. A key component of this strategy are our public quarterly threat reports. Since we began this work, we've taken down and disclosed more than 200 covert influence operations. These operated from 68 different countries and operated in at least 42 different languages, from Amharic to Urdu to Russian and Chinese. Sharing this information has enabled our teams, investigative journalists, government officials, and industry peers to better understand and expose internet-wide security risks, including those ahead of critical elections. We also share detailed technical indicators linked to these networks in a public-facing repository hosted on GitHub. which contains more than 7,000 indicators of influence operations activity across the internet. I wanted to very briefly share the key trends we've observed in the course of our investigations into influence operations around the world. First, Russia continues to be the most prolific source of CIB. We've disrupted more than 40 operations from Russia, targeting audiences all over the world. Second, Iran remains the second most active source of CIB globally. Third, while historically China-origin clandestine activity was limited on our platforms, we've seen a shift by Chinese operations in the past 2 years to target broader, more global audiences in languages other than Chinese. Across the different geographic operations, we've seen an increasing reliance on private firms selling influence as a service, the use of generative AI tools, though I would note with little impact on our investigative capabilities, and finally, amplification through uncritical media coverage of these networks. I'd be happy to discuss these operations in more detail throughout our discussion today. Countering foreign influence operations is a whole of society effort, which is why we work with our industry peers, including some of the folks represented here today, independent researchers, investigative journalists, government, and law enforcement. Thank you for your focus on this work, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Agranovich. I just want to mention to Mr. Holquist that you're not muted in case you're singing to yourself or something. We don't, I'll give you a break. We go now to Mr. Deere and Mr. Ehrlich to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Steve Deere, and I'm the Director of Public Policy and Government Affairs for TikTok Canada. I'm also joined today by my colleague, Justin Ehrlich, the Global Head of Policy Development for TikTok's Trust and Safety team, who's joining virtually from California. Thank you for the invitation to meet today to speak about the important issue of protecting Canadians from disinformation. The topic of today's hearing is important to us, to the foundation of our community, and to our platform. TikTok is a global platform where an incredibly diverse range of Canadian creators and artists have found unprecedented success with global audiences, where Indigenous creators are telling their own stories in their own voices, and where small business owners like Caitlin Campbell, who spreads a message of positivity while caffeinating Canadians with street brew coffee, are finding new customers, not just across Canada, but around the world. Canadians love TikTok because of the authenticity and the positivity of the content, and so it's important, and it's in our interest, to maintain the security and the integrity of our platform. To do this, we invest billions of dollars into our work on trust and safety. This includes advanced automated moderation and security technologies, and thousands of safety and security experts around the world, including content creators located in Canada. Content moderators located in Canada. We also employ local policy experts who help ensure the application of our policies and consider the nuances of local laws and culture. When it comes to outside manipulation and foreign interference, TikTok takes an objective and robust approach. To start, our community guidelines prohibit misinformation that may cause significant harm to individuals or society, regardless of intent. To help counter mis- and disinformation, we work with 19 independent fact-checking organizations to enforce our policies against this content. In addition, we invest in elevating reliable sources of information during elections, unfolding events, and on topics of health and well-being. We relentlessly pursue and remove accounts that break our deceptive behavior rules, including covert influence operations. We run highly technical investigations to identify and disrupt these operations on an ongoing basis. We've removed thousands of accounts belonging to dozens of networks operating from locations around the world. And we regularly report these removals in our publicly available Transparency Center. Addressing disinformation is an industry-wide challenge that requires a collaborative approach and collective action, including both platforms and government. As an example, TikTok has joined forces with other companies to combat the deceptive use of AI in elections. We became the first video sharing platform to implement technology from the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authority and Authenticity, which automatically labels AI-generated content. And we endorse the International Foundation of Electoral Systems, voluntary guidelines for election integrity for technology companies, which provides a shared set of expectations and practices for companies and election authorities to promote election integrity. Such collaboration is also critical as we approach the next federal election. In 2021, TikTok worked with Elections Canada to build an in-app hub that provided authenticated information on when, where, and how to vote. That year, TikTok was also the only new platform to sign on to the PCO's Canada Declaration on Electoral Integrity Online. As we approach the next election, we will be building upon these efforts and leveraging learnings and best practices from other elections taking place around the world, including in the US. Before I conclude, I want to provide the committee with information regarding TikTok's actions related to the revelations made by the US Department of Justice on Tenet Media. Following evidence presented by the US DOJ and our own investigation, we removed accounts belonging to Tenet Media, its founder Lauren Chen, as well as a fake news outlet, for violating our policies on promoting deceptive behavior and paid political promotion. I also want to note that TikTok removed accounts associated with Rosia Segodnya and TV Novosti for engaging in covert influence operations on TikTok, which violate our community guidelines. We label other state-affiliated media accounts on our platform to provide the community with important context about the source of the information. Thank you again for the invitation to speak with the committee, and we look forward to sharing more with you about how we are addressing these important issues.
Sir, for your remarks. I now invite Ms. Doyle and Mr. Hultquist to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and ladies and gentlemen, members of the company. My name is Lindsay Doyle, and I'm responsible for government affairs and public policy for YouTube in Canada.
colleague John Hultquist, Chief Analyst at Mandiant Intelligence. Responsibility is our first priority at YouTube. More than 500 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube every minute. The scale and our global reach demand that we take seriously the importance of protecting free expression while also ensuring we are doing the right thing for our users, creators, and advertisers. A critical aspect of our responsibility efforts is doing our part to protect the integrity of democratic processes around the world. That's why we have long invested in capabilities and tools to address threats to electoral integrity. We recognize the importance of enabling the people who use our services in Canada and abroad to speak freely about the political issues most important to them. At the same time, we continue to take steps to prevent the misuse of our tools and platforms, particularly attempts by foreign state actors to undermine democratic elections and political discourse. As it relates to Russia, since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, YouTube has blocked thousands of channels and millions of videos from Russian state-sponsored organizations, including channels directly tied to RT and Sputnik. So far in 2024, we have terminated more than 11,000 YouTube channels linked to coordinated influence operations with ties to Russia. We also continue to terminate channels belonging to Russian entities and individuals subject to sanctions. Following a U.S. Department of Justice indictment issued on September 4th regarding covert Russian support to a U.S.-based media company, we terminated Tenet Media's channels owned or operated by its owners, and material that was cross-posted to other channels. We have also removed copies and re-uploads of Tenet Media content from additional channels. Our investigation is ongoing, as are our efforts to combat coordinated influence operations. In recent weeks, Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom have sanctioned RT for engaging in both direct disinformation and covert influence operations. These recent developments highlight the importance of receiving information from law enforcement, government, and trusted flaggers, which add to the signals we can observe about activity on our platforms. We continue to ensure compliance with applicable sanctions while upholding our terms of service. Finally, over the last 2 years, the Russian government has periodically throttled access to YouTube. In the last 2 months, we have seen frequent efforts to throttle and even block YouTube in Russia. YouTube has long been one of the last remaining sources of independent media inside Russia and has refused to comply with a number of Russian government demands to remove political speech and similar content. To help advance our work against foreign interference and state-sponsored activity, Google created the Threat Intelligence Group, and I will ask my colleague to briefly
I'm
introduce
sorry,
his work.
could we just pause for a moment?
Il y a un micro d'ouvert et ça fait de l'interférence. Peut-être.
C'est ça?
Ouais. Monsieur Alquist, faudrait qu'il ferme son.
We'll suspend for a brief moment and sort this out.
Close, shut off his mic. His mic is open, so it makes him.
Mr. Hultquist, mic's open.
I'm sorry, who's Mike?
Mr. Hultquist.
Mr. Hultquist? Mr. Hultquist, if you could mute yourself for the moment, we'll see if that solves our problem. Unless you're about to speak. Yeah. No?
I am about to speak, but that's why I unmuted you. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, no problem.
Faut jouer au maximum. Monsieur Alquist arrive et là, oups, ça. Alors, je ne sais pas comment, je connais rien dedans, mais je pense qu'il y a un petit problème d'équilibre là, de volume. Là.
C'est bon. On va encore avec Monsieur Hultquist.
Merci.
By the way, for those of you online who are not familiar with our Zoom system, if you look at the bottom of your window, there's a translation or interpretation button, and you can choose whether to listen to English, French, or Origin. So, what's that?
I would hope these witnesses are
One hopes, but
tech savvy.
I'm an IT guy,
Right.
but I'm a little behind on the technology these days myself. So, anyway, Mr. Hultquist, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to address this important issue and discuss our work. Within our mandate at Mandate Intelligence, we identify, monitor, and tackle threats, including coordinated influence operations and cyber espionage campaigns. Our teams disrupt activity on a regular basis and publish our findings. We also provide expert analysis on threats originating from countries like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and criminal organizations. Russia has a vast covert apparatus that includes their intelligence services as well as contractors from their private sector. These organizations have differing capabilities, which range from complex intrusion operations to coordinated inauthentic behavior on social media platforms. Though these threats are serious, we have been successful in disrupting this type of activity on our platforms quickly and effectively. Russian information operations activity has been used in a number of contexts to support Russia's strategic and tactical concerns, but most consistently focused on undermining democratic society by highlighting polarizing political and social issues. Since the launch of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, this activity has prioritized narratives designed to erode Western support for Ukraine. Our team is constantly on the lookout because this activity is always adapting. The actors develop new techniques to blend in with real users, scale their operations, or in the case of intrusion actors, new techniques that might help them gain illicit access to systems. We continue to monitor and adapt to the use of new techniques to proactively tackle new threats.
Law enforcement and civil society all play important roles in safeguarding democracy and combating disinformation. At YouTube, we are committed to doing our part to keep the digital ecosystem safe, reliable, and open to free expression. We appreciate the committee convening this important hearing, and we look forward to hearing your questions.
Remarks? We'll start our questions now with Ms. Dancho. Please go ahead, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. I appreciated your testimony of Facebook Meta and YouTube Google and TikTok as well. And I appreciate that you've brought your foreign interference intelligence experts and that you each have your own designated branch to tackle this growing issue. I also believe you each mentioned how you've been dismantling any reach of tenant media. So I think that's priority number one, and appreciate that you've all taken action on that. Certainly, conservatives are of the position that any any actor that's taking money from a foreign government to undermine the Canadian interest should be held fully accountable. And of course, your platforms have a very strong role in ensuring that is done. Given your technology, you would know even sooner than government, I would imagine, in many circumstances when that's being done. So it sounds like you're being quite proactive. But I would like to understand better what government has done tangibly to assist your platforms. We've heard a lot proclaimed from the current Liberal government that they're taking foreign interference seriously. We can start with Meta. What tangible efforts have been made to assist Facebook, for example, in these efforts to combat foreign interference?
Thank you for that question. And through the chair, we have not had any specific outreach from the Government of Canada on this issue. We do engage with government departments when we think there is information that's relevant and necessary to their mandates. And we do brief them on our work, including work related to foreign interference. And so we have done those briefings for government agencies in the last year or two, but we have not had specific outreach from government departments or government agencies on this issue in the last, I would say, 12 to 24 months.
Thank you. So just to confirm, you have proactively, on your own accord, reached out to brief government. Government in the last 2 years has not reached out or provided any tangible resources in the last 2 years regarding foreign interference. Just confirming that?
That's correct, yes.
It's surprising given Facebook's reach, and of course China, Iran, Russia, and others are trying to utilize your platform. And I'm surprised that no action really has been taken, but thank you for taking initiative. YouTube, do you have anything different or similar to add or otherwise?
Thank you for the question. We do, again, regularly brief government as well as parliamentarians on our efforts, especially as it relates to foreign interference. With respect to some of our internal teams, our threat analysis group, which is a team of experts and security analysts who regularly are both detecting and disrupting foreign campaigns. They would also be the ones to likely, coordinate and discuss these matters directly with law enforcement. But these have been proactive briefings on our account.
Well, so as Ms. Curran had said, you have not received proactive efforts to you from government. It's been you initiating those efforts. Is that correct?
We do provide those briefings proactively, yes.
Thank you. And then there's been attempts by Liberals to make a connection between our party, the Conservative Party, and Tenet Media. With your reach, are you aware at all if there's any connection between the Conservative Party and Tenet Media, to Ms. Curran?
Thank you for that question. I'll turn this over to my colleague, David Agranovich. I think he has looked into the issue of whether there is a connection between Tenet Media and the Conservative Party of Canada and can answer that question directly.
Based on our investigations into Tenet Media and broader Russian state-controlled media, we do not see evidence that links the Conservative Party of Canada to Tenet or RT. I will say we're very careful when we do the investigations to avoid speculating beyond the evidence we can see on our platforms. And our investigations are focused on the behavior we see on our family of apps. So our investigations, we cabin to the things we can observe and the assessments that we can make based on what we see on our platform.
Thank you very much. Certainly, we're all involved following foreign interference for quite some time, notably foreign interference from China in our elections and their efforts that they've made through social media and other platforms to influence Canadian elections. We don't know, as I mentioned, Iran also a popular state actor with foreign interference, and of course Russia is the topic of conversation today. My concern, though, is that all these actors are watching how the Western world reacts to their foreign interference. So, for example, we recently learned in the Globe and Mail and through the foreign interference investigation that a former public safety minister of the Liberal government took 54 days to authorize a surveillance warrant for a Liberal power broker provincially, also a former Liberal cabinet minister provincially, and they dragged their feet on foreign interference, and we can go on and on. They took 6 years to designate the RGC as a terrorist organization. This perhaps is more towards your intelligence individuals that you've brought. What sort of message does that sort of inaction or reluctance to act, reluctance to take things seriously, what does that send to Russia when they're looking to interfere with misinformation on social media platforms? Is that a strong enough message that we're sending to Russia? So perhaps to Facebook's intelligence officer.
So my role at Facebook is to investigate and disrupt networks that we see on our platform. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to speculate on how governments might perceive other government actions.
Thank you. To YouTube's counterpart.
I have to echo David's comment. I'm an expert on the adversary behavior and cyber adversary behavior. I wouldn't be able to speculate on how the government reacted to something like that.
Very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Dancho. We go now to Mr. McDonald for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, witnesses, for being here today. I'll quickly, just on Ms. Dancho's recent comments, I wanted to know why that, if there's so much work being done on this, Tenet Media was only taken down after the U.S. indictment. Maybe Meta could speak to that first, please.
I'll turn that over to my colleague, Mr. Agranovich.
I'd be happy to, and thank you for the question. At Meta, maybe just to zoom out a bit about how we handle state media entities, and then when those state media entities start to bleed into covert influence activity, like what you saw with Tenet. Now, for several years now at Meta, we've labeled state-controlled media entities from 10 different countries. And Russian state-controlled media specifically, we put in place additional measures that restricted Russian state-controlled media after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Those measures included things like not just labeling their pages on our platform, but also putting in what we call interstitial friction. So if someone tries to click on a link, for example, to a Россия Сегодня story, they actually get a pop-up window that says, hey, are you sure you want to go visit that? That's Russian state-controlled media. We also labeled posts by any user.
Mr. Agranovich,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I have some more questions, and I want to make sure that I get to them because I don't have much time. Mm-hmm. So earlier today, I went in and I went on to...
Well, excuse me. Do you want the answer, or do you want to ask your questions? Mr. Agranovich is the expert in these issues.
Excuse me, guys. We have a problem ici.
I think there's a little technical problem here.
Je vais aller sur floor. Quand je...
Not interrupt. It's hard for, and everybody to not interrupt, because it's hard for the interpreters to translate when that happens. So, Mr. McDonald, we'll make allowances for the time. Please carry on.
Ahead of your appearance today, I tried an experiment on my Facebook page. I tried to post an article from the Globe and Mail from September 10th, written by Shannon Carey, entitled, Canadian right-wing influence alleged dealings with Russian media company took place despite sanctions. After posting, there was a pop-up, which you just mentioned, news, and I have it here, news content can't be shared in Canada. But then I went back and I did it again under after that post failed, I went back into Lauren Southern, that is still on Tenet Media's Rumble page, and I tried how Indian scams will be the end of Canada. And I was able to post that no problem, with no pop-up. So, and I have it here, and you can try it while you're there online if you wish, because it's still there. And it says, got a picture of the Prime Minister with a Canadian flag on one side, an Indian flag on the other, and it says the New India. So you may be working very hard to accomplish perhaps what we heard in all the preambles. But I'm wondering, with the amount of money that Meta is making, 134 billion US, and up from 119 in 2022, like, do we need more legislation surrounding social media platforms through government to be able to do this? Or, like, what are the issues?
Maybe I can address both that question and your first question, which is when we removed Tenet Media, Rossiya Сегодня, kind of that broader Russian state-controlled media entity, the measures we had in place already had reduced engagement with their content by 94%. They had reduced their posting by about 55%. That was before we removed them. We ultimately took the decision to remove them, not based on the DOJ indictment, because we think it's important that as a technology company, we aren't simply removing things because the US Department of Justice says that they're bad, but because we actually could see on our platform violations of our policies. Rossiya Сегодня and their subordinate groups violated our policies that prohibited foreign interference in elections. They violated our policy against claiming to engage in foreign interference in our elections. And to your second question, these groups, whether it's Rossiya Сегодня, the clandestine brands that they've created, or influence operators more broadly, are incredibly adversarial actors. What we saw from RT, for example, when we started labeling them, was they began creating hundreds of look-alike domains where they would rehost their content, because what they were trying to do was avoid the interstitial pop-ups that you referenced and avoid the link friction in the labeling by creating domain after domain after domain so that our teams would have to keep chasing them all over the internet, which we certainly will do and continue investing in. But I think it is the nature of this problem set that the adversaries that we and our partners in government and our partners in the tech industry are dealing with are highly motivated to continue to try to do what they're doing, right? They often are operating on behalf of governments. They're not operating out of commercial concern. They're operating at, to advance a nation state directive. And as a result, our goal is not to eliminate them from the internet entirely, because that's unlikely to ever happen. Our goal is to make it so hard for them to get the reach that they're looking for that they essentially go somewhere else or try to find other avenues for their operation.
Thank you, Mr. Grovanich. Look, I'm not challenging you to some extent, but what I am saying is we're sitting here and we heard the preambles of everything that's taking place. And it's hard when 3 hours ago that I was able to do that and believe everything that is being told to us. I have another question maybe for all of you.
Question?
Mic is turned off. Can members control their own mic?
They can, but if the chair has any indication, it's not reliable.
Well, this is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess I want to know, social media platforms that are here today, do you share information on the issues that are at hand here today? Like, how much do you communicate with one another when you come across an incident like this? Anybody can answer.
I'm happy to take that first, but would also welcome, I think, my colleagues on this panel are also all part of that information sharing. When we do a takedown of a CIB network, we commit to sharing our findings publicly. So we do that quarterly in our threat reporting. We also share detailed technical indicators with security teams across the industry. And increasingly, we've started doing the indicator sharing publicly. So we created a GitHub repository that any security team, including the ones we may not know the contact information for, can access and find indicators for example, Russian networks across multiple platforms across the internet. We have about 7,000 indicators so far in that network, in that GitHub, and we'll keep
specifically
adding to it
share
as
with
goes by.
Instagram or TikTok. Like, there's nothing directly that goes directly to them. There's nothing in your policy or regulations.
We do both. So we share directly with other technology companies' security teams when we see operations that target their platforms, and we also share publicly, in part because these operations often target very small companies that may not have a security team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On y va maintenant, Monsieur Fortin. Monsieur Fortin.
We'll now go to Mr. Fortin. Mr. Fortin, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm going to address my question to Meta, perhaps to Ms. Curran. Meta, in my opinion, has a great deal of influence and over information available in Canada. The internet is something that is evolving quickly, daily, and we've seen that. I'm thinking of another hearing in a different committee, and I won't get into that. But over the past few months, Meta has been disallowing access to certain articles that help Canadians and Quebecers be more informed about issues. It seems that there is a lot of misinformation on Facebook in particular and on other social media as well, but certainly on Facebook, a lot of disinformation, misinformation, and it doesn't seem that Meta is actually acting on that, but is trying to make profit. And if there isn't any profit, then it doesn't matter about democracy and fairness. That's a fairly widespread opinion, and perhaps it's wrong. But I would like to hear from you if you want to set the record straight. But it seems that you're there to make money, and democracy and fair information is not your priority. Is that the case or not?
I think that's incorrect. So listen, I think you're talking about a couple of different issues. The first is removal of news from our platforms. We would love to restore news to Facebook and Instagram. The reason we had to remove it from our platforms is because the current government introduced and passed Bill C-18, the Online News Act, which was going to require us to pay $80 million a year, approximately, for content that had no particular commercial value to us. In fact, we think we provided great value to news publishers. We estimated that in the order of $230 million per year to publishers in distribution value. So publishers in Quebec, we worked with Le Devoir, we worked with La Presse, we worked with publishers in Quebec across the board to distribute their content on Facebook and Instagram and get it to larger audiences. And we think we were very successful in doing that. Now, the current government introduced legislation which gave us no option but to remove news from our platforms, or we were going to have to pay for it. My colleagues at Google are currently still enmeshed with the CRTC in trying to figure out how this scheme is going to work. But we would love to restore news to our platforms. We could do that tomorrow if we were scoped out of C-18, the Online News Act, or if the legislation was repealed, or even if publishers were given the option to opt in or opt out to that legislation. We could restore news content to our platforms tomorrow. And look, as a Canadian, I would love to do that. I would love to see Canadian news back on our platforms. I would love to see news from Quebec back on our platforms. We are unable to do that within the legislative framework of C-18, but I think that can be fixed.
Si je comprends bien, Madame Curran.
If I understand correctly, Ms. Curran, the problem is that it would cost Meta $80 million or $18 million a year. Is that the price that Meta is placing on democracy and accurate information?
No, not at all. In fact, I would argue we still have content on our platform from non-governmental organizations. We still have content from academic institutions. We still have content from regular.
I apologize for
consider credible.
I'm sorry.
Accurate.
Je veux simplement.
I just have a minute left, and I understand your position. I was expecting that answer, but we are dealing with this problem of disinformation from Russian state-controlled authorities, and everyone is concerned here in Canada. But regular people are looking for news, and often it is on social media. I wish it was different, but that's the reality. So I think that Meta has a social responsibility, not just Meta, but all other social media organizations as well. But you have an important, an essential role even to play to allow information to get to the public. We would expect a higher sense of responsibility on your behalf. I think $80 million is not much for Meta to pay. Just in a few seconds, can you answer whether you agree with that?
Monsieur Fortin, I agree that we should have news content on our platforms. We would love to have news content on our platforms, including from news outlets in Quebec. We had private deals worth in excess of $20 million with private news outlets. We would love to have that content back on our platforms. We can't do it within the very restrictive framework that C18 presents. So if we are scoped out of C18, or if news outlets are given the option to opt in or opt out of C18, we would love to put them back on our platforms. We think we have worked with news outlets in Quebec. We would love to work with them again, and we could turn that content on again tomorrow.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you.
Monsieur Boulris. Monsieur Boulris.
We will now go to Mr. Boris. Please go ahead for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses who are here with us. We are all users of your platform, like millions of people in Quebec and Canada. I think, though, we have to stand back a bit. Your companies were not built to defend democracy or to improve the quality of public debate or politics. Your job is really to make a profit. So it's not your mission really to ensure proper information, but you do have an additional responsibility that has been on the shoulders of traditional media in the past, but now it is up to your companies to have clear rules to rule out disinformation and foreign influence. But it's not your primary mission. So as elected representatives, we are concerned because you are well prepared, you know how things work in committees, you have told us about all the wonderful things that you have been doing and how much money you've spent. It's hard for us in the 5 minutes we have to evaluate all of that, but even if we say it's all true, then we are still concerned because the misinformation, disinformation is still out there. We would like to know what you intend to do to improve the situation, because there are countries like Russia that want to reinforce these divisions and discord in our society. So what are you going to do to improve the situation? That's my question.
Let me chime in here first. So Meta has the largest fact-checking network of any independent fact-checking network of any online platform. We have more than 90 independent fact-checkers in more than 60 languages who are checking information on our platforms to determine whether it is misinformation or disinformation. If they determine it is false or partly false, we label those posts, that content, or we remove it from our platforms. So my colleague, Mr. Agranovich, has talked about malicious disinformation from state actors. But disinformation or misinformation from other sources is something we send through our fact-checking network of more than 90 fact-checkers now. So in Canada, that work is done by Agence France-Presse. We are working also potentially with another Canadian partner in advance of the next election to review that information as well. So it's very much our goal to make sure that misinformation and disinformation is removed from our platforms. That said, though, we are also a platform to connect Canadians, to ensure that Canadians are able to share information, to share their views, to connect with their friends and family. And we want to do that without suppressing or limiting their ability to express themselves. So as you can imagine, Monsieur Boulris, that's a fine line. We have to make sure that we're not preventing Canadians from expressing themselves while removing misinformation at the same time.
time with your colleagues.
Sorry, I'm passionate about this issue.
I know, I can
Yes.
see that.
Thank you so much for the question. And first and foremost, we absolutely share your concern with respect to broad disinformation and foreign interference. We do know that this is a shared responsibility, and it's a responsibility that we absolutely take seriously, because ultimately for us, the safety of users on our platform is critical, and we absolutely believe that we play a critical role in keeping people safe online. We do have very clear and rigid policies with respect to misinformation, as well as foreign influence operations and disinformation. We have teams that apply our policies at scale 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As I mentioned earlier, we have our threat analysis group, which actively works to disrupt ongoing activity. That group also shares that information with law enforcement on the ground to ensure that we have a holistic approach across society. I would appreciate if my colleague John could weigh in perhaps a little bit on exactly what his team is doing. I recognize I have
Maybe
limited
Mr.
time,
Deere before,
but
and
perhaps
after
if we
that,
still have
in the
time.
second round, I can come back.
No problem. Merci.
I'll actually let my colleague Justin talk a bit about our policies on mis and disinformation.
Yeah, I would chime in and echo what has been said before, but we take responsibility for protecting the integrity of our platform very seriously. And as it relates to our mission is to inspire creativity and bring joy, and divisiveness is antithetical to the community that we're trying to create. So that's why we work very hard to protect our platform with some of the most aggressive misinformation policies in the industry, where we remove any content that we identify that may be significantly harmful to our community, and we won't amplify other content that may be unverified. We also embrace a strategy of media literacy, knowing that we need to help strengthen the understanding of our community and our users to be more resilient. And like our Meta colleague mentioned, we also partner very closely with independent fact checkers and work with them to assess the veracity and accuracy of all of our content that is on the platform.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you. Mr. Boulris?
Start this second round. We will terminate this round with Mr. Boulris. Mr. Motz, please go ahead, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here this afternoon. I just want to follow up on some of the C-18 conversations with Meta, Ms. Curran. Does the impact of C-18 create a vacuum on your social media platform? Certainly it restricts Canadians' access to reliable news content, but does it provide a way that more disinformation or misinformation is available on those platforms?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, we would say there is lots of credible information still available on our platforms. There are academic institutions, there are government pages, there are politicians' pages. There are pages from non-governmental organizations and civic organizations. All of that information is still available on our platforms, including information from regular Canadians, which we would not characterize as misinformation either. However, look, as a Canadian, I'd love to see Canadian news back on our platforms. We'd love to have the opportunity to put it back on our platforms, and we could do that tomorrow if C-18 were repealed or if we were scoped out of that piece of legislation.
Very much. I want to, witnesses that we've had so far in this study have indicated that Russian interference is used across the political spectrum. There's no right or left. In fact, contrary to what my colleagues across the way have alluded to in the past, it's not a far-right phenomenon. And media reports, in fact, have indicated that of the 90 key accounts that promote pro-Moscow sentiments, 33% are controlled by people on the far left. So I'll ask you, YouTube officials, what does this mean from your perspective with respect to their tactics, Russians' tactics, and how you're seeing this deployed maybe in other countries?
Thank you so much for the question and for the opportunity to weigh in. I will ask my colleague John to share some of his insights here.
It's actually fair. Common to see these actors work both sides of the political spectrum. It's important not to over-index on any specific operation, because many of these operations have a counterpart that's focused on the opposing audience. I'll give you an example. The remnants of the Internet Research Agency, that was the group that was so active in 2016, the elections in the United States. They're still around, or remnants of that organization are still around, and there's a very recent operation that was sort of right facing. But prior to that, they were doing a left facing operation, or sort of left wing facing operation. So it's not uncommon to see them work both sides of the angle. The other thing I think is really important when it comes to this activity is there's just no favored version of the truth, right? The point is often to flood the zone with narratives that are often completely contradictory to each other.
Right. So thank you very much for that. I want to maybe ask across the platforms that are here. There seems to be a tone potentially that rather than taking responsibility for their role in dealing with foreign interference, that it would be easy for government to point the fingers at the social media platforms that they're solely responsible to make sure that no foreign interference, no disinformation or misinformation is ever available to the Canadian public. Now, having said that, what do you think governments should do? And it was alluded to just recently about misinformation or disinformation campaigns, so they don't reach Canadians without interfering with their right to expression. And is there things that government can do to work with social media platforms to ensure that the right of expression is still upheld, but we do some work to prevent the dis and misinformation? I'll start with Meta.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague David Agranovich, who can talk about the work that we have done with governments elsewhere, and I'm happy to chime in with the work we've done with the Canadian government as well.
Thank you for the question, and maybe I'd break my answer to 3 key points. The first is, the more that we aggressively enforce on networks on our platforms, the more we see them nebulized both across the internet and increasingly rely on tactics that look more like Cold War style traditional espionage tradecraft. And the people who have the best visibility into that activity are often government or law enforcement organizations. We welcome information sharing from security organizations that might have better insight into nation-state intelligence services or their proxies, so that we can then use that information to key our own investigations on our own platforms. Second, we're very careful in our own public disclosures, both to avoid speculating about the potential for influence activity and to make sure that we're reporting critically about the effectiveness of those operations. We see, for example, a Russian network known as Doppelganger, which has been the focus of quite a bit of public reporting recently. Very focused, less so maybe even on reaching real people and more so on making themselves look like they're really good at reaching real people, right? Oftentimes these organizations are selling a story to their bosses or their funders as much as they might be trying to sell a story to their targets. And so governments in partnership, I think, with us, civil society organizations and media, we can be really careful about how we talk about these efforts, not to make, for example, Russia to sound as all-powerful as they'd like us to think that they are. And then third, there are, I think, concrete tools that governments have that could meaningfully make these operations more difficult. One of those is the fact that governments can levy geopolitical power, whether that's diplomatic sanctions, financial sanctions, or things like information sharing, like we saw with the Tenet indictment, that can then enable other actors to take action. The second would be, we've noted, for example, influence networks increasingly rely on off-platform web domains. So just websites that we certainly can't take down, even if we try to block them, but the content then persists across the internet. We published a report last year with some concrete recommendations for governments thinking about. Sure.
Thank you. We go now to Ms. Zaid. Ms. Zaid, go ahead, please. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses for appearing before the committee. For my first question, I would like to have answers from all the 3 witnesses, and I would appreciate a verbal answer. Did any witness here today discuss their testimony with any members of this committee or the staff before this meeting? I would like to start with Ms. Curran.
No, we did not.
We reached out to all members of the committee to offer any questions or answers in advance of our testimony today.
You shared your testimony with all members?
We did not share our testimony, but we did reach out, including to yourself.
We did not.
Okay. Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Diar from TikTok. In 2023, ByteDance reported approximately 120 billion US dollars in revenue. How much of this revenue was reinvested back into your teams working on clearing your sites of misinformation and disinformation?
I don't have an exact figure, but perhaps my colleague Justin can speak a bit about how we address mis and disinformation.
Sure. Thanks, Steve, and thanks for the question. I just want to first underscore how invested we are in keeping the platform safe. And this year alone, we're investing over $2 billion on trust and safety. And in particular, we have several teams working on misinformation and covert influence, and make that a top priority for us. We've been working in this space across 150 elections around the world over the last 4 years, and continue to invest more resources and strengthen each election that we have. And as I said earlier, we basically take a three-part approach around protecting our community through removing content, empowering our community through user literacy campaigns, partnering with experts, and in working closely with independent fact checkers who help assess the veracity of our work, of the content on the platform.
Thank you. My next question is also for you. We know that inflammatory material generates more engagement, and more engagement leads to more ad revenues. Is it fair to say that your platform benefits financially when and if you allow the dissemination of mis and disinformation on your platforms?
I would disagree with that statement. TikTok, Justin mentioned earlier, our goal is to create a place for creativity and joy, and people come to TikTok for authentic content and engaging content, but positively engaging content. And when you spend time on TikTok, if you engage positively with a video, whether you watch the whole video, comment on it, like it, share it, that gives us a signal of the type of content that you may like. And that's what people, when I talk to people, that's what they come to TikTok for. I'm sure in Scarborough, you heard earlier this year when Keith Lee came to a number of restaurants there. He's an American food TikTok creator, and there were lineups around the block to go to these restaurants. There was a shawarma restaurant, there was a jerk restaurant, and like that was the biggest thing over the summer on TikTok in Toronto, and that's the type of experience that we really try to cultivate.
Chair, I would share my rest of my time with Mr. Geir.
Chair, just how much time do I have left?
Go ahead.
How much time do I have left, Chair?
You have a minute and a half.
Okay. No, Chair, I wish I was in the room so I could have a longer conversation with Ms. Curran afterward. I can't believe some of the testimony that I've heard today. As a generation that was really en masse, I've seen the effects of Facebook and other social media on my generation. Ms. Curran, did you just say that there are 90 fact checkers for your platform, a platform with hundreds of millions of users, that's probably in the billions, and a platform that's available in every single language? You have 90 fact checkers in 60 languages. So what you're saying is there's like a fact checker and a half on average for every language that you're fact checking. Do you have a statistic on how many posts are being produced on your platform per minute? And do you think that 90 fact checkers is an adequate number for that, to check that many posts?
Yeah, I will get back to the committee with an answer on posts per minute. I don't have that answer now. We have more than 90 independent fact checkers checking content on our platforms in 60 different languages. Yeah, those are the numbers currently.
I am very scared by that statistic. 90 fact checkers for I don't know how many hundreds of millions of users in every single country in the world practically. How many posts are being produced per minute? That's a very scary thought as to the state of misinformation and disinformation around the world.
Sorry, I should clarify. That's not 90 individuals. That's 90 different organizations doing fact-checking in more than 60 languages. So, for instance, in Canada, we have Agence France Presse. We have had the Canadian Press previously doing fact-checking in Canada. So that's more than 90 organizations. That's not individuals.
Sorry, I have very limited time. Could you provide the committee with a number of maybe how many individuals, not the organizations, but how many individuals are actually checking these facts? So it might be multiple individuals per organization. The other thing that I wanted to focus on was that your organization made $134 billion last year. It was up from $119 billion the year from before. And what you just told the committee is that you'd rather save
Mr.
Facebook
Gahir, I
Meta.
gotta cut you off there. Sorry.
Sure, I need like 30 more seconds to make the point.
So, on y va maintenant, Monsieur Fortin.
We'll now go back to Mr. Fortin for 2.5 minutes, please. My question will be for Mr. Deir. You have paid a lot of money in advertising. We've got Tenet Media, which has certainly put up a lot on TikTok. But how much money did Tenet Media make through its advertising on TikTok? Do you have any numbers for me?
Have a figure on that, or whether they were advertised, and I'm happy to follow up with you and look into that. As we mentioned in my opening statement, we did remove the Tenet Media account from TikTok following the U.S. Department of Justice allegations.
Est-ce que de votre propre chef,
have you or TikTok, do you have plans to undertake investigations? You said that the U.S. took action and then you closed the account, but do you undertake your own investigations?
Perhaps I can let Justin talk a bit about how we investigate covert influence on the platform.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and thanks for the question. It's one that we feel is a topic we invest a lot in. We have several dedicated teams who work on this area, and they are always proactively seeking to detect and remove networks and deceptive accounts like Tenet Media.
Monsieur
We
Rick,
have
désolé,
several
il reste quelques
internal
secondes, mais
intelligence.
si vous faites cette enquête-là, comment expliquez-vous?
I only have a few seconds left. So you need the U.S. to take action before you do. So why is that?
No, I would certainly not say that's the case. We have many internal investigations ongoing, and we take action without external intelligence, but we also leverage multiple sources of external intelligence, both with our vendors and third parties, as well as leveraging government investigations. As soon as we learned of the DOJ investigation, we launched a further exploration into Tenet Media, as we can't directly adopt the conclusion of any government and need to explore our own on-platform evidence. Once we identified that, we promptly took action and removed both Tenet Media and its founder.
Merci, monsieur.
For a violation of both deceptive actor policies and paid political promotion, both which are clear violations of our community guidelines.
Thank you, Monsieur Rich, et merci à tous les témoins.
Thank you to all the witnesses.
On va maintenant à Monsieur Boulle.
We will now go to Mr. Boulouris for the second round. You have 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to be very frank with you. The last round of answers to my questions was unsatisfactory. So I want to know and ask what you were planning to do to improve the situation, and you told me generally what you had done up to this point. I want to also talk about another issue. We've talked about disinformation, misinformation, but there's also the echo chamber where people just repeat and repeat information that is sometimes false. Sometimes there are algorithms that actually promote that because they intend to increase interaction, but there are people that are very anti-science and so on, and it makes public debate very much more difficult. So I would like to hear your views on how to counter that.
Perhaps for TikTok, I can let Justin talk about how we address unverified information.
Thanks, Steve. So we take the information integrity ecosystem very seriously. And as I've spoken to you about some of our policies before that we remove, but we also embrace media literacy and labeling, where we, for content that we don't fully remove off the platform, but may be unverified or inconclusive, we will provide a label so that the user has a better sense of the full context, and we won't amplify it on the feed to make sure that we are restricting the reach of unverified accounts. And more generally, we also offer additional content, such as we have a STEM feed in some markets where we're rolling out to help lift up content that we consider nutritious or informative.
Je sais pas si une des deux témoins YouTube ou Meta veut intervenir là-dessus.
I wonder if one of the other two witnesses would like to speak.
Sure, I'm happy to weigh in here. I would say that just as it relates to YouTube, we take an approach that's similar to others, but specifically for us, our recommendation systems actually raise authoritative and high quality information and reduce the spread of low quality information. So we view our recommendation systems as one of our most effective lines of defense in combating misinformation and preventing exactly the spread that you've referenced. We as well, removing the content at source is really critical to making sure that we stop the spread. So that's obviously where our community guidelines would come into place, as well as our content moderation policies that we do at scale as well.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you.
This panel to a close.
Chair.
Mr. Moss.
I have a suggestion which I hope the committee will agree with, just based on the testimony that we've heard today. And in particular, Ms. Curran's comments about not sharing Canadian news, but the fact that Tenet is still being shared on Facebook via Rumble, which I find really disturbing, that Tenet is still getting the information out and the disinformation, Russian disinformation is still getting to Canadians.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Are we going to be permitted to debate this? It's just going on for a while. I just want to make sure we can respond.
I would like to invite these three witnesses back for another hour so that we have more time with them, is what I was suggesting. So with the agreement from the committee that the clerk invites these three witnesses back for an hour.
So do we have the agreement of the committee? Ms. Dancho, briefly, please.
I suggest we discuss it in subcommittee because there's a lot of different witnesses I think we can bring back, but I'm happy to discuss it in subcommittee or openly, but on its own time.
So I'm taking that Mr. Moff has moved a motion. Is the committee in agreement with this motion?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. If she hadn't given adequate notice for the motion, she'd have to have UC, wouldn't she, to move it?
No, this relates directly to, to the matter at hand.
We'll need it in both official languages as well, then.
So that the motion is to invite these witnesses back for another hour, right? So
well,
does the committee?
How many times are they going to do this?
Does the committee wish to
That's
support this motion?
It's
All in favor? All opposed? So the motion is carried. We will invite the witnesses back. We thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your testimony. Obviously, we want you back, and so the clerk will be in touch when we figure out a time for that. So thank you very much for your appearance today. Thank you all for your valuable contributions to this study. So with that, we are suspended. this meeting back to order. I would like to welcome our witnesses for the second hour. As an individual, we have Mr. Anthony C. Boyer, Assistant Professor, Royal Military College of Canada, and Adam Zavajanovic. We'll work on that, journalist. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I would now invite Mr. Boyer to make a statement of up to 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. It is reassuring to see how seriously the Public Safety and National Security Committee is taking the threat that the Russian disinformation influence operations are posing to Canada, Canadians, to our democracy and our society. The points I'm making today are my own only and do not represent any position of any organization. My research focuses on the weaponization of information by authoritarian regimes. I research how Russia, China, and Iran target democracies with hybrid gray zone warfare and disinformation to undermine rules-based democratic countries like Canada. I look specifically at how AI-enabled applications are affecting information attacks on democracies and what we can do to defend democracies against information attacks and other attempts to influence and undermine our societies. Today I'll focus specifically on what the Kremlin is doing when it's targeting Canada, so what it's doing, why it's targeting Canada, how it's targeting Canada, and what I recommend we can do about this. So what is Russia doing? Russia is deliberately and systematically targeting Canadians and its allies 24/7 in...
Désolé, monsieur.
I have no translation since the machine doesn't work.
Yeah.
But both of them.
Suspend for a minute.
Sorry.
Sir, if you could, you might have to restart your statement. I don't know if...
So my point was, what is Russia doing when it's targeting Canada? So Russia deliberately and systematically targets Canada's allies 24/7 in the information space. The Kremlin sees itself in a war with the West and believes that, like in a zero-sum game, the worse off the West is, the better the Kremlin's off. It's important to note that is not the position of all Russians, of course. This is the position of the governing elites and those that benefit from the corrupt regime of Putin. The Kremlin seeks to leverage and exaggerate societal fault lines, disrupt our political system and societies as part of a strategy called Russian reflexive control, aiming at changing long-term worldviews and mindsets of citizens. The goal is to effect behavioral change in Western countries towards Putin's personal goals. All Canadian residents are targeted by Russian disinformation influence operations, not just selected politicians. Targeting of Canadians and Canadian interests happens not only at home but also globally, and is also aimed at generating an effect or impact on Canada beyond our borders. Some Russian influence activities are designed to provoke and a response which can then be leveraged by the Kremlin to harm Canadian interests abroad. They are part of the following larger hybrid threat that Russia is targeting the West with in general. undermine electoral processes and the function of democratic institutions, threats against and sabotage of economic activities, services of public interest, and critical infrastructure, the use of coordinated disinformation, foreign information manipulation and interference, and radicalization to radicalize and disenfranchise citizens, and cyber attacks. This is a whole bouquet of which disinformation and foreign influence is a part. Why is Russia influencing the West? For the Kremlin, like other authoritarian, undemocratic regimes such as China, the sheer existence of democracies is a threat to their regime survival. Countries like Canada show every day that the repression, violence, censorship, and corruption we see in authoritarian, undemocratic regimes is not only unnecessary, but that it is harmful and fundamentally not in the interest of citizens. The prevention of the free flow of information, the competition of ideas, repression of dissent, violence, and corruption lead to societies that cannot compete with rule of law-based democracies like Canada. Neither in terms of living conditions, economic development, political stability, or general happiness of the population can these systems compete with us. Therefore, the way we live, how much we thrive directly challenges and threatens authoritarian systems as it shows citizens living under authoritarian regimes how much better we live in democracies. How is Russia influencing the West? Russian influence operations aim at eradicating organic political will formation, so the actual will of the people. This is achieved through increasing cognitive load of target audience to the point that they turn away from political processes. Russia achieved this cognitive overload with information the following way. First, they flood the information space with target disinformation campaigns and with misinformation that additionally creates noise and confusion that leads to a so-called information overload. At scale, which is enabled through AI applications, they create information suffocation. Citizens are then overwhelmed by information and find it so difficult to find out what is actually happening that they turn away from news sources, leading to what we call information apathy. Over time, this results in a deer-in-the-headlight effect in information paralysis, where target audiences are so overwhelmed that they stop participating in the political process. This leads to the end goal of authoritarian regimes, in exploiting information by authoritarian regimes, which is the feeling of loss of agency of citizens. That eradicates in the end civil society and prevents organic political will formation because citizens feel they cannot participate and they cannot find out what's going on and they have literally no agency. AI-enabled applications make this much easier to achieve and faster than was possible in the past. You see in the notes I have for you, I'm not going to read all this, how this is actually done with AI and how this changes what Russia can do. In the interest of time, I'm just going to go to my recommendations. I have 5 recommendations. What I believe we need to do is, number one, across the board, consider information policy revision of the Canadian government. Where are we vulnerable to information attacks? And this updated with what's possible with AI today. Secondly, adapt a sanctions framework similar to that you just introduced yesterday that enables a much more effective targeting of individuals that support Russian influence operations. Third, approve an updated D&D information operation policy, replacing that of 2018, which is clearly not matching our security threat situation we have right now. Fourth, focusing more on the role of influencers in Russian influence campaigns, so influencers, the key to the role of influencers, and finally holding Canadian companies accountable that are helping us get around the sanctions we put in place to access Russian media. I will leave it with that. You'll see more of my notes. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. We go now to Mr. Zivojinovic.
Zivo, it's okay.
For 5 minutes. Or, yeah, up to 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the privilege and opportunity to testify before you today. I've spent the past 2.5 years living part-time in Ukraine and have, as a freelance journalist, written almost 100 articles about the country. Through my work, I've tried to dispel some of Russia's disinformation narratives, mostly by working with Ukraine's LGBTQ, Jewish, and racialized communities. Yet reporting the truth in this context can feel Sisyphean. Russia's propaganda machine is formidable and well-funded. As we saw with the recent Tenet media scandal, influential commentators are sometimes paid to disseminate poisonous falsehoods. Yet we also know that many people happily share Moscow's narratives for free because they have been seduced by propaganda that has been carefully tailored to flatter their ideological worldviews. It is difficult to distinguish these useful idiots, who genuinely believe what they say, from paid or unpaid actors who work under the direct or indirect orders of the Russian government. Dmitry Lascaris, a eco-socialist activist who is popular amongst Canada's fringe left, is a seminal example. Since Russia's full-scale invasion began, Lascaris has promoted Moscow's propaganda narratives with aggressive obsession. In the spring of 2023, he visited Russia, met with foreign ministry officials, and sycophantically whitewashed Putin's regime and war crimes. He has also made repeated appearances on RT, a sanctioned Kremlin-owned media outlet that Global Affairs Canada has identified as an arm of Russia's intelligence apparatus. He has done this despite recognizing in his own writing that RT is propagandistic. Lascaris' Potemkin adventures, which he says were fully self-funded, were widely criticized, including in an article I wrote for the National Post and, more importantly, in an essay written by Alexei Kovalev, a prominent Russian dissident journalist who now lives in exile. Yet it remains unclear whether Lascaris is an agent of foreign influence or just a zealot. It is also unclear to what degree he is receiving assistance from the Russians, whether wittingly or not. As a simple journalist, I lack the capacity to make these determinations. The media may play a vital role in reporting on disinformation, national security, and foreign affairs, but our resources are limited. It is up to Canada's state institutions, with their formidable investigative powers, to review ambiguous cases and build legal frameworks that define, identify, and punish unacceptable collaboration with hostile foreign governments. I want to emphasize that this is not a partisan issue. While Lascaris exemplifies the failures of the far left, the far right has been just as toxic. In early 2023, for example, there appeared to be a coordinated campaign among MAGA Twitter influencers to portray the war in Ukraine as a hoax and to assert that no footage of it exists. Their claims were so exasperatingly absurd that they seemed impossible to respond to. How do you argue with someone who insists that the sky is red, not blue? I cannot offer much insight into the specifics of Russia's propaganda operations, nor the tools available to thwart them, as that is beyond my expertise. What I can provide, however, is a sense of how this propaganda plays out on social media, along with analysis of the knowledge gaps that have allowed disinformation to proliferate. Insofar as recommendations go, I advise that Canada proactively protect its information environment by funding public and media education initiatives. It is not enough to shut off a sewage leak. Some environmental remediation is needed. One way this could be done is by amplifying minority voices within Ukraine, particularly LGBTQ Ukrainians who could dispel myths circulating in ultra-progressive circles, and Jewish Ukrainians who could engage with conservative audiences. I also believe that firsthand experience is a powerful, if imperfect, antidote to disinformation. Many of the journalists I met while in Ukraine said that they were surprised when they first visited the country. It seemed that, beforehand, their perceptions had been colored by outdated, negative stereotypes about Eastern Europe. Upon seeing Ukraine in real life, it was apparent to them that Russia's narratives, predominantly regarding neo-Nazism and the so-called persecution of Russian speakers, were ridiculous. To that end, I would recommend funding opportunities for media figures and thought leaders to visit Ukraine, so long as this is done in a careful manner that does not undermine the independence of the Canadian media.
Thank you, sir. We'll start our questions now. We're going to abbreviate these question slots. 4 minutes. Mr. Shipley, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you to both witnesses for being here today. And first of all, I need to apologize, Mr. Zivo. I passed you in the hallway. I didn't realize who you were, so I walked right by you. So I apologize for that when I went out for a little break there. My first question is for you, sir. You mentioned Dimitri Lascaris in your opening remarks. I just want to make clear who this person is and what you did in this case. Dimitri Lascaris is a left-wing Canadian influencer with tens of thousands of Twitter and YouTube followers. He also ran as leadership candidate for the Green Party in 2020 and narrowly lost, winning over 40% of the vote. Last year, you exposed his role in endorsing Kremlin propaganda and exposed the proliferation of Russian information operations against left-wing influencers in Canada. Can you speak about your work and why the far left is a target for the Kremlin interference operations?
Well, I mean, I think for decades there's been a problem where some individuals on the far left endorse a brain-dead version of anti-imperialism where anything which is considered anti-Western is good. I mean, we saw in the 1970s people apologizing for the Khmer Rouge. We saw people shilling for Maoist China. We saw people apologizing for the Cultural Revolution. So this is not a new phenomenon. for Dimitri Lascaris, he fits into this long tradition of people on the fringe of the left doing this kind of behavior. Regarding his work, I mean, I was only invited to speak here about 3 days ago, so I wasn't able to systematically go through some of his content, but I did take a quick look today and yesterday. And one example that stood out was an article that he wrote when he visited Russia, where it was titled 10 Days in Moscow. And so there was a segment there concerning Putin's regime legitimacy. And so there were approximately 24 paragraphs, of which about 22 justified regime, like Putin's rule. Basically said that most Russians love Putin. This is why their living standards are great. And he did mention the repression of dissent, but there was only about a paragraph and a half of that. And I thought that that spoke quite loudly about his approach to this topic. When I interviewed him last year, one of the things that stood out to me was his insistence that Nazism, or neo-Nazism rather, is a problem in Ukraine, a significant one. I asked him how he was able to justify this, given that far-right parties have never had more than 2% of the vote since 2014. He seemed a little bit confused by that, and he emphasized a few anecdotal accounts that would suggest that, you know, maybe some far-right figures have outsized influence in Ukraine. At that point, I mentioned that LGBTQ and Jewish Ukrainians disagree, and they've said that there is no issue with the far right in Ukraine. I mean, not any significant one, that it's being exaggerated. And he seemed unwilling to believe that, which I thought was also quite illuminating.
Thank you, Mr. Zivo. Mr. Seaboyer, next question is for you, and I've only got about a minute left because we're on a short timeline today. Could you please discuss RT's connections to the Kremlin's intelligence apparatus?
Well, RT is misleadingly labeled by many as a media organization. I would say it's not a media organization. It's not state media. This is the wrong use of the terminology. It's basically a propaganda organization that directly coordinates with Russian intelligence service. So it's basically de facto a part of Russian intelligence service in terms of messaging. But all Russian media now function in a similar way in the sense that if the journalists don't say exactly what the Kremlin wants, they're shut down. They go to jail or their organization is shut down. So there is no free media of any kind of state media in Russia right now.
I've only got 10 seconds left, so I'll give
10
that
seconds. Below you. Thank you. We're going to Ms. O'Connell now for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here. Mr. Zivo, I'm going to start with you. In our last panel, I'm not sure if you were able to hear it, but in our last panel, we actually had representatives from Meta speak about the fact that, and my colleague here, Mr. McDonald, actually did an example where sharing Canadian media content could not be shared on Facebook, but sharing tenant so-called media articles could be. And the rationale given, and the reason I'm asking you this, is you mentioned that you wrote an article for the National Post and others, but you are a journalist that is not paid by Russia, and because Facebook can't make or doesn't want to pay for work like yours, they're okay to keep up content that is free, Russian propaganda that's free and paid for by Russia. How can we actually deal with the Canadian public and public at large being able to discern between what is misinformation, what is truth, when Canadian journalists are not able to be paid by platforms for their work, but they're okay to make profits off of work that is being done and paid for by Russia?
Well, so what I would say is that if Canadians are unable to access mainstream news sources on popular social media networks like Facebook or Instagram, that certainly predisposes them to consuming alternative sources, which may be less trustworthy, may have lower editorial standards, may have opaque financing. And I think that is a concern. At the same time, I don't think it's the only factor at play, but I do think it is one that is often underappreciated. So I would agree with your analysis here.
Thank you. So Russian propaganda being free for Facebook to promote, but Canadian journalism costing them too much should be of grave concern for, I think, all Canadians.
Well, I agree.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Seaboyer, I hope I'm saying that right, but please correct me if I'm not. One of the other areas in concern, and you've mentioned some recommendations, and in Canada, with the passage and Royal Assent C-70, we were able to create a foreign agent registry. And certainly one of the things that came out of the U.S. indictment that actually initiated platforms to act was their Foreign Agents Registration Act. Could you speak to some of the sanctions models that you would like to see as our registry rolls out to frankly punish those who break those rules?
Well, I recommend looking closely at what the EU just introduced yesterday, which is much more targeted, which enables preventing individuals that have been found guilty of supporting Russian influence operations from entering the country, seizing their financial resources, preventing them from flying through the country. It's much more strictly, and I think we should cooperate. This is a problem that does not just affect any one country. We should cooperate as closely as we can with our NATO allies, with partners in the European Union. But to do that, we need to be able to have within the government capabilities and resources allocated to this and taking that to a level where we can actually cooperate with them. Right now in NATO, we're at the level, unfortunately, where we not only can't cooperate on the same level, we're not even interoperable with other major NATO partners, which is a huge problem in the information space.
Thank you. And so this isn't just a Canadian problem. This is an attack on Western democracies. Is that fair to say? You mentioned NATO. Is there a broader coordination that you're seeing in terms of dealing with the fact that, again, it's not targeting just Canada, but it's to undermine democracies around the world?
Absolutely. Like I said, any democracy is a threat to authoritarian regimes because it's a model. It shows how well it functions. Freedom of speech. People are not arrested for posting stuff online, like in China, for example. So we're a model, basically, and the citizens in those authoritarian regimes think, why can't we live that way? And that puts pressure on their systems. And they try to, one way they're dealing with this is throwing as much dirt at Western democracies as they can. They do this with dis and misinformation. But yes, there are efforts within NATO more and more, also coordination with the EU, where countries are working together, sharing information of attacks, sharing also lessons learned and how to prevent or better defend against these attacks. But these are really all early stages where we are right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
O'Connell.
you.
On y va maintenant, Monsieur Fortin.
We will now go to Mr. Fortin. You have 4 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank our 2 witnesses. My question is for Mr. Seaboyer. In your introduction, you talked about 5 recommendations that you have for us. Can you provide those in writing? Shall we interrupt or suspend? Is it possible to have the 5 recommendations in writing? Yes?
That to the clerk with including a lot more additional points on that because I didn't have time enough to mention this.
Merci. L'autre chose que je voulais...
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to ask you, I'm listening to what you have said and others before you, and other meetings where you didn't attend. In 2019, you published a research report that included information about Russian influencer and about the techniques and procedures and possible countermeasures. Can you talk to us about those countermeasures? What can Canada do, in your opinion, to implement countermeasures to counter this type of interference by Russian agents?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for that question.
A lot that can be done. First of all, the very first thing as an academic I'm going to say is we need to have an understanding of how this actually works and a proper understanding of the threat that comes from this. And there's still this prevalent thinking that if it doesn't explode and if there's no visible blood directly, that it's not dangerous. And that leads to resource allocations. Other security threats, and we have lots of other security threats as well, are prioritized over this. But I believe the long term, this is a very serious threat. So the first point is raising understanding in the population and in political leadership. And we've made progress there, but it's still not anywhere close where we need to be. The second approach is there's 2 sides. My recommendation is hardening the target. Hardening the target is always long term the best strategy. That is making people media literate, enabling people to better understand the difference between legitimate information and mis and disinformation. And there are promising models. We see what the states like Finland, Sweden, and Denmark are doing. They're very effective at this. We can take from their programs. That's one point. The other is, which I mentioned, on the government side, you'll see my recommendations. We need, on the military side, to have updated policy that clearly states what the CAF can do in this space, what it can't do, and gives clear guidelines on what can be done. I recommend also more effective sanctions, also implementing the current law that we have, so going after companies that are enabling, circumventing the sanctions for accessing Russian media in Canada, for example. These are some recommendations. So hardening the target on the one hand, but also understanding the threat better and providing resource and training for security services to be more effective in the space.
Merci, Monsieur Seaboyer.
Thank you, Mr. Seaboyer. We had Mr. Oxander this week, and in response to my colleague, Ms. Dancho, he said that Russians do things differently in different countries, and it depends on the context. And in Canada, from what I understand, they are trying to interfere with Canadian support of the Ukraine cause. So why do they take a different approach from one country to another?
C'est pour moi?
No, vous, monsieur.
Okay.
For you.
Why are they trying to prevent, well, this is one of the goals they're having, is to undermine support, popular support for the support of Ukraine, particularly also undermining financial support we're giving and potential weapons support. And that's one of the intermediate goals. But I want to emphasize that Russian disinformation campaigns are not election cycle bound. They're not one issue focused. They're generally trying to, over long term, change the worldviews of people, citizens, democracies, and make democracy appear less attractive, less well-functioning than it is. But yes, in individual campaigns, their effort, their clear goal right now, probably their major goal, is to undermine support for Ukraine so that the Canadian government does not continue to support Ukraine as it has.
Merci, monsieur. We go now to Mr. McGregor for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And yeah, thank you to both witnesses for joining us today. Professor Seaboyer, maybe I'll start with you. I appreciated your opening statement where you were just really sort of outlining the threats that exist against Canada, and particularly how the Kremlin uses it, like that information overload strategy, to really, find those fissures in Canadian society, blow them apart, and eventually we end up with an apathetic populace that seems to just doubt institutions that we all once had a great deal of trust in. And certainly as members of Parliament, we see that effect almost on a daily basis in our dealings with constituents. One of the interesting things about this study is we've had the chance to interview witnesses who reside in Eastern Europe and for whom Russia has always been an existential threat. And we're not talking over the last decades, but for centuries. And particularly in Sweden, I've been really interested how there is the existence of a Swedish psychological defense agency. We've also had some witnesses talk about how Canada needs to enact a digital resilience strategy and really equipping our citizens with the proper tools to detect these misinformation and disinformation attempts. And the challenge, of course, is while still allowing a free exchange of ideas. Do you have any thoughts on that Swedish model, and do you think that might be something that Canada has to one day employ, like a standalone agency? Is that something that you can offer some comment on?
Yeah, I think long term, that's definitely a step we need. We need a much more coordinated, better resourced, better trained central organization that engages in that. I think their Swedish model is great. Yes, there are challenges with this, but I think we want to, on the one hand, keep free speech, but a clear line we can draw is Canadians in Canada can have free speech, but foreign intelligence organizations have no right to any speech in Canadian law. So if we're looking at what they're doing through RT and other organizations, that's a clear line we can draw, and that is the major threat that we're facing, particularly from China, Russia, and Iran at this point. But yes, we need a centralized, coordinated organization that is very well with lots of oversight and accountability, of course, like it's our culture in Canada to have political institutions, so it would match that. But yes, we need that. I agree with that.
Mr. Zivo, maybe I'll turn to you. I think like one of the challenges today is that, you know, so much of our public discourse is happening on social media platforms that are owned by a handful of billionaires, and their primary motive is to make more money for themselves. And you know, not everyone's voice is equal on social media. It's not like all of us gathering on a town square. We know some voices are amplified over others, and the algorithms push people down certain rabbit holes. For many people, it's still a mystery on how that all happens. But I think it's a similar question, and really the theme is like the challenge before us. Like how does the Canadian government approach this problem without there being a perception of it, you know, censoring the Canadian public, but really how do we put in those tools to really, I guess, defend our democracy so that we can still have a free exchange of ideas, but without the corrupting influence of a foreign government that is really seeking to undermine us?
I mean, so if you're talking about, for example, some voices being privileged over others in social media, I think that X, formerly Twitter, is a great example of that. So after Elon Musk purchased X, many Ukrainian influencers reported that they saw a significant decrease in their reach and the impressions of their posts. And for months, they wondered whether this was just something that they were imagining. And then it seemed as if the algorithm was revealed to actually penalize posts that mentioned Ukraine. However, it's been a while since I wrote an article about this, so I forgot some of the specific examples here. However, we do know, for example, that Musk did at one point boost his own posts over others, and we do know that at this point there's almost no real accountability at X. So it's conceivable that in the future Ukrainian content could be politically marginalized. Now, what the solution is, you know, that's a very complicated question and one that I'm not qualified to answer, but intuitively I would trend towards ensuring that social media companies have kind of like widely distributed ownership between a large number of shareholders, because if you have private ownership and power is concentrated within one individual or one family, then there's a complete lack of accountability, versus when you are accountable to a large number of shareholders, there is less opportunity for abuse.
So we'll start our second round with Ms. Dancho, please. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. I appreciate your excellent testimony. It certainly is clear that Canada faces very serious public safety and national security threats as a result of foreign interference. Mr. Chair, as a result of that, I'd like to give verbal notice of the following motion. Given that Sami Doon is a proxy for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PLFP, a listed terrorist organization in Canada since 2003 to raise funds to finance PLFP's violent attacks on Jewish people, on the one-year anniversary of the horrific October 7th, 2023 Hamas terrorist attacks in Israel, Sami Doon hosted a protest in Vancouver in which a speaker told the crowd, quote, "We are Hezbollah, we are Hamas," end quote, and chanted, quote, "Death to Canada, death to the United States, and death to Israel," end quote. Sami Doon openly supports Hezbollah and Hamas, which are both listed terrorist organizations in Canada. Sami Doon is banned in Germany, with the German government saying they serve as a, quote, international network which disseminates anti-Israel and anti-Jewish propaganda, and supported and glorified various foreign terrorist organizations, including Hamas. Sami Doon's leadership was deported from Germany in 2019 and denied entry into the European Union. In 2022, Sami Doon demonstrations promote Jew hatred and pro-terrorism messages that encourage anti-Semitic threats and violence in Canada. And given that Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis, is a Yemen-based terrorist proxy of Iran that since the October 7th terror attacks have disregarded international law by launching attacks on innocent civilians and merchant vessels in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, that our closest allies, the United States, Australia, and Israel, have already designated the Houthis as a terrorist group. Canada has provided logistical support to the armed forces of the U.S. and the U.K. that have conducted airstrikes against the Houthis. The committee reports to the House that it recognizes that Sami Doon and the Houthis are a threat to public safety and recommends that they both be listed as terrorist entities under Section 83.05 of the Anti-Terrorism Act. And in fact, Chair, I would like to seek unanimous consent from all parties to adopt this motion now at this meeting.
So you said it was a notice, but you want now unanimous consent?
That's correct, given
Do we
the events
have
of this
unanimous
week.
consent to adopt this motion at this time?
De mon côté, j'aimerais avoir une copie écrite.
I would like to have a copy of this, please, because it went very quickly. Even the interpreter had difficulty and didn't have it. So I would like to just take a few minutes to read this, please.
We will suspend for 2 minutes. So the request is for unanimous consent of this motion. There's no debate on unanimous consent. If there is unanimous consent, the motion passes. If there's not unanimous consent, since we have notice, it can be moved at a later date. So do we have unanimous consent at this time?
Monsieur le Président, malheureusement, je peux pas donner mon accord.
Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, I can't give my consent because I'm replacing my colleague. And this is a long motion that seems to make quite a bit of sense, but I have to consult our research bureau and my colleagues. So I would like to put this off until our next meeting because I don't think it's urgent that it be adopted, and then we will be able to make a decision. Thank you.
There is no unanimous consent. The motion can be moved at the next meeting, if you will. We'll go now to Ms. Demoff. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to the witnesses for being here, both of you, and for the important information. I understand Lauren Chen has declined our invitation to attend. And so I would like to bring forward a motion, which I hope we can deal with quickly, that the committee summon Lauren Chen to appear for no less than 2 hours in relation to the study of Russian-backed interference and far-right disinformation campaigns intended to manipulate the Canadian public, and that she appear before November 8th.
Can we,
Yep.
firstly, the clerk has advised me that we do need a date and time specified.
So can I ask a question on that? If we summoned someone for a date and they have a legitimate reason that they're unable to attend on that date, they're getting surgery, they're in another country, does that mean we would have to issue another summons? That's why I didn't put a specific date on there, because people can have legitimate reasons. I thought when we did this at another committee that I'm on, that we did it by a certain date.
That's right. So that's our understanding from the chief clerk?
Yeah, we can do this way if you want to, but for the bailiff, usually I need a specific date, and according to our procedure, usually we need a specific time. But we could adjust, for instance, I would have to come back to you on your questions, but we can go this way and see how it goes. But for usually the bailiff, I'm going to have to specify a specific date. I can manage through your motions to be more specific.
But I think this gives you the flexibility that if you provide the date of October 22nd, for example, and the individual comes back and says, for very legitimate reasons, not I don't want to come that day, but I'm unable to, then it gives you flexibility to say, well, could you come on October the 29th?
I do agree that it provides me options.
Okay, so let's leave it as by November the 8th then.
So, so the motion is to invite this person, is to summon this person by a certain date and time, and the clerk will fill in the blanks. We will sort that out. Do you need a written copy at this point? Okay.
Just for rogue parliament.
That would throw the whole thing in the, anyway. So.
Four meetings. But that doesn't mean, no, it has nothing to do with the number of meetings.
No, I know, but it means that we have 4, it's by November the 8th, not on
Yes.
November the 8th?
That's right.
So we have 4 meetings for her to say, no, I'm not coming.
Yeah.
And so she's got to have legitimate reasons.
Exactly.
4
Glenn.
times.
Yeah.
So
I don't
to
care,
issue a
summon her.
summons, basically, we have to give, in the summons, we have
Yeah,
to
I
specify a
appreciate
date and time. And failure to comply ultimately was a contempt of Parliament.
Right.
And anyway, so are we ready to vote on this?
Yep.
So all in favor of issuing the summons? I think that's pretty unanimous. Okay, thank you. So we still have, so it's 5:30. I know a lot of people are getting out here. We have Monsieur Fortin and Monsieur McGregor for 2 minutes each. Monsieur McGregor, merci. Monsieur Fortin, 2 minutes.
C'est beau, Monsieur le Président.
C'est bon? On est terminé. Merci à tout le monde. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Adjourned.